Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 10 o'clock p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Monday night, February 28th. I'm happy to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us. On for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate it. I got a lot of friend requests recently, too, and that's really awesome. Thank you so much for all your friend requests and tuning in. And it's a lot of work keeping up with all my shows. I did mention today on this morning's show that I'm cutting back on some shows just for now. Probably just for, I'd like to think just the month of March. I just need a break, and I'm just tired and going, plus working full time and a 2-hour commute every day, and it's just, I don't have time to even just relax or breathe. So I'm just taking a little bit of a break for March. So I hope to be able to resume my schedule in April. That's what my hope is anyway. And it'll give me some time to do a few things that I need to do that I'm just putting off because I don't have time. And so I'm just going to switch my morning shows from every day of the week just to Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays for the month of March, and as well as the evening shows as well. I'm going to bump the instead of Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for this show, it'll be Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that'll give me a bit of a break, and it'll give me some whole days off just to relax, because I do Dreamcatchers Talk Radio as well here on Blog Talk Radio, and that's Monday through Friday in the evenings, and that's a commitment that I've made, and so I don't want to back out on that. It's very important to me. So, thanks everybody I appreciate it. It'll kind of give everybody else a break too. And thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, I've almost done 600 shows, and I have almost 23,000 shows listened to. So a lot of people are listening to my shows, and I thank you all for tuning in. I really do. This is my personal journey, and it's also my goal in life to speak publicly about the issues of child abuse, raise awareness, and promote education and awareness regarding the issues of child abuse, especially on my evening shows, Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us. And then in the morning, I talk about my own story and as it relates to the issues, that I've dealt with in my own life. And I also talk about other stuff that I don't relate with, but I know other survivors go through. And so it's mainly a show for survivors in the morning, one child abuse survivor to another. And so thanks very much for tuning into my shows. I really appreciate it. It wouldn't be worth doing if nobody was listening. So I thank you to all of you who are tuning in. And tonight I want to talk about, we were talking about dysfunctional families, and the rest of that article was mainly about survivor issues. And so I want to bump that up to the morning shows, probably starting Thursday morning for that one, just because it's mainly dealing with survivor issues. And tonight's show, I want to talk about how child abuse affects children. And this is from healthyplace.com, www.healthyplace.com, and it's under the abuse topics, and it's called How Child Abuse Affects Children, written by C.J. Newton, M.A., a learning specialist. And this article is it's just like a good overview, of how child abuse affects children. And it's absolutely, like I talk about this almost daily, which I won't be doing for the month of March, but this is horrific what child abuse does to children. So I really wanted to just take a look at this article. So I'm not a counselor or a therapist or anything like that. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows, and mainly just to be a public voice out here talking about child abuse. And I think the more we talk about it, the better the situation is, because if we don't talk about it and we don't find the answers, and we don't talk about the programs and talk, we have to become comfortable talking about child abuse, because child abuse is happening whether we're talking about it or not. Child abuse is going to continue on whether we address it or not. And the sooner we can figure out what's going to work to help people, the only way we can do that is through communication, open communication, and it is going to take everyone to get involved. So, do whatever you can. Most people who would listen to my shows obviously already are. But if you're somebody else, you're thinking, well, what can I do to get involved? There's so many ways you can get involved, locally, nationally, internationally. Just pick something that you feel you've looked into and seems to be doing a good job. It's a legitimate charity, and get involved and help them out, to help save children's lives and to help make a difference in this mess, because the children do not deserve this. So this particular article, how child abuse affects children, and young people, I always say this on every show, young people under the age of 18, you have to listen, you have to get permission to listen to my show, mainly because I believe in protecting children at all times. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and you need to learn how to keep yourself safe online, and when there's a chat room present, you really need to know how to keep yourself safe in a chat room. Young people don't realize, I think quite often, that there's a lot of people out there who pose as young people. So there's child sexual predators and pedophiles. They know how to get a hold of kids, right? And so they say they go online and they say, oh, I'm 12 years old or I'm 14 years old or whatever, and I like to skateboard or whatever, play all these video games and whatever they play nowadays, Xbox and all this. I don't even know what that stuff is. And they say, well, I like all the latest music, and what school do you go? They try to get information out of these young people. They'll try to find out where you live. They'll try to find out your phone number. They'll try to get you to work you against your parents so that you don't trust your parents anymore, and then they'll try to set you up to meet them someplace many times and find out where you go to school so that they can stalk you at your schoolyard. And it turns out that these people are not 12 or 14-year-old kids like you. They are 30, 40, 50-year-old child sexual predators who are looking to get a hold of a child and sexually assault them. So you do not want to become a victim of a child sexual predator. You need to get that information on how to keep yourself safe. I know when I look up information on how to keep myself safe and how other people are safe online, I just type into my browser, Internet Safety for Children, online safety, and start looking through the websites. There's lots and lots of good information out there. And I know the FBI has a great website. FBI.gov has a great website on information for parents out there on how to keep your children safe, and also for young people, how to keep yourself safe online, so that you do not become a victim of cyber harassment or child sexual predators or anything else, right? So learn to keep yourself safe. And everyone has to listen to your own discretion, at your own discretion, to all of my shows. I say this on every show. It's just really important that people know I'm talking about abuse, and I don't sugarcoat it. I don't minimize it. I just tell it like it is. And so my shows can be quite disturbing, and so you have to know what's good for you to listen to. And ultimately, it is your decision. It's your ears. It's your choice. So if you feel like topics like of abuse might bother you, then you have to turn it off. It is clearly your choice. So how child abuse affects children, from C.J. Newton. And this was written December 16, 2008. But it doesn't matter because it's some good information. It says the effects of child abuse on children are wide-ranging, from the formation of troublesome behaviors to being forced to hide the family secret, quote-unquote. Children suffering abuse develop a range of maladaptive, antisocial, and self-destructive behaviors and thoughts by trying to cope with the abuse, by trying to understand the situation and why the abuse is happening. They said, think of it like this. A person is robbed and beaten while walking down the street at night. In trying to deal with the situation, the person thinks, I shouldn't have walked down that street, or I shouldn't have been there at that time of night, or I should have walked with more confidence, or I shouldn't have made eye contact, or I should have in quicker, or I should have fought back, or any number of other ideas. The point is, the person feels a sense of control over the situation if they can blame themselves or something they did for the attack. Instead of the world being a dangerous place where violence occurs at random, the world becomes a safe place within certain behavioral perimeters. And so they say children experience the same kinds of thoughts when they suffer abuse, except they are much more immature and often make much less sense because the violence is occurring in their own family, and nothing makes sense in that situation. And they said here, and the abuse suffered by children occurs much more frequently. If the adult in the above example is attacked and mugged every week, despite changing their behavior each time, it won't be long before the person starts coming up with bizarre explanations for the violence and becomes afraid to leave the house entirely. If the person has a chance to talk with the attacker every attack, like in cartoons, where the rabbit asks the fox, why did you attack me? And the fox comes up with a different silly reason each time. Or like in child abuse, where the victim and the perpetrator interact constantly, the person will be sent through a psychological maze of smoke and mirrors, leading to any number of bizarre ideas about how to avoid the attack next week. They said by coming up with ideas about what they did to cause the abuse and what they can do differently to avoid the abuse, children also develop a range of maladaptive behaviors which can become pathological problems. They said hiding the family secret. Yeah, it's a huge issue, for children. I know I'm a survivor, so obviously everybody knows who listens to my shows, and the stuff that goes through your mind. It's like I remember one time I detailed this stuff in my book, A Life of Death or Redemption. If anybody would like to get a hold of it, all the proceeds are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and it's relatively inexpensive because we wanted to keep the price down so that normal people could afford to get a hold of it. I didn't want to charge some crazy price for it because that's just silly. Like I really wanted people to read my story, and all the proceeds are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, which makes me extremely happy. And so, I detailed quite a bit of the abuse, and it's very graphic, just so people know. But there was one time that I walked by my mom while she was pulling a pan of cookies out of the oven, and I had a halter top on. It was summertime, and my mom was baking cookies all the time. She baked chocolate chip cookies every other day, sometimes every day. That was just her thing to do. I think that's what helped her try to keep her sanity. Like, she just made cookies, right? So she was pulling this sheet pan of cookies out of the oven, and it was hot, and she burned my side. Well, of course, I screamed out because it burned my side, and she put the cookie sheet down and got mad at me for coming behind her and not watching out so I wouldn't get burned, and blamed me, said it was my fault. She said, "Look what you're making me do," and she started to shove me into the oven, and which I burned my knee, and then she had my hands on the racks, and so she burned me and then said, "Look what you're making me do. You are doing this to yourself," she said. So in my mind, I mean, I was pretty young. I was like 11 years old, and I was just trying to figure out like how she could put that on me. Like, I was just walking by, and I was thinking, well, there was no other. I mean, I didn't know that she wouldn't be looking out for me. You know what I mean? And kids quite often don't look. You know what I mean? To sort of see what the situation is, and that's why they get hurt. You know what I mean? But the thing is really, what would have been the great thing is if my mom would have just set the cookie sheet pan down and said, "Oh, let me check that out. Are you okay?" And, "Oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. And we got to be more careful when we're walking." Instead of that, she was my main abuser, right? So she just used that for another excuse to get mad and abuse me, right? So and blamed it on me. You know what I mean? And so this is a lot of times that's the case. It's hard for kids to wrap their head around why the abuse is happening and why they're getting blamed for stuff that really, was not their fault. You know what I mean? It was just whether it was just an accident or whatever. Kids spill things, drop things. I remember being beaten for spilling milk on the kitchen table because I couldn't lift my arms up over high enough to pour the milk on my cereal. Because I think because of the abuse I had been suffering, I'm sure of it. Like, I had been thrown into walls and had some neck damage, and so I couldn't lift my arms up to put the milk on my cereal, so I spilled it on the table, and I was beaten for it. So, it's absolutely horrific what this stuff does to children, right? There has to be a way for parents to learn how to cope, and there are programs out there, lots and lots of programs for parents nowadays. I mean, back in the 60s, 70s and stuff, there was information, but it was not as well, it wasn't out there like it is today because of the internet, because of the networking and the programs, the money that's being pumped into the system. You know what I mean? To provide help for parents who are struggling is there. People say, "Oh, this is not there." Well, I mean, the only issue is that there's too many kids being abused, and it is eating up, way too much of the money because they don't even have the resources to help these kids who are being abused in many counties in many areas of the United States. And the articles that I've read recently, and it's horrific, but there is information for parents who are struggling. You don't have to hurt your children. You don't have to. There's nobody forcing a parent to hurt their child. Like, that's a choice. People choose to abuse, right? And so the whole issue is if we can get people to change their minds and stop abusing their children. And people say, "Oh, well, it'll never happen." And I say, well, that's just a cop-out attitude. It's like saying, "Oh, well, we'll never be able to cure cancer, so let's just stop all the research. Let's just stop the whole thing. We'll just let everybody continue to die from cancer. No big deal." No, they're still looking for the cure for cancer, and they believe one day they will find it. And I'm still saying that we can stop child abuse, and I believe that one day we can stop it. And why? Because it's a choice. So we've got to reach the younger people. We have to reach the younger generations who are going to be the next sets of parents to get into their psyches and really drum it home. You know what I mean? That child abuse is wrong, and that they've got to stop abusing children, because so many of these young people right now who are going to graduate are going to go out and have kids, and they're going to abuse their kids. And I always look at these people like, well, how many of these little young people are going to go out and abuse their children? It's really sad when you think of it that way. There's so many parents to be who will abuse their children, and it's like, why are people doing this to their children? I will never understand it, but it's sad. It's really sad. The children pay the price. I don't so much care about the adults. You know what I mean? They make a choice to live these horrific lifestyles that they live. They make choices. They make bad choices, and they're adults, and so they just too bad. But kids, it's not their fault. They're counting on their parents. They're counting on their caregivers. They're counting on everyone to look out for them. And so, it's not these kids' fault. It's absolutely horrific. It says, hide in the family secret. In addition to distorting children's thoughts, abuse also forces children into a position of having to hide the family secret. This prevents children from having real relationships and has lifelong effects. And because our ability to form healthy social relationships is learned, abused children are deprived of many skills necessary to navigate the social world. their entire concept of a relationship is distorted, and this leads to problematic relationships in life and even on the job. So another disturbing aspect of abuse is the experiential restraint it puts on children. If a child fears doing anything new because of the chance that it will lead to a violent attack, or because an abusive parent keeps extremely tight control over them, the child will lose his or her sense and wonder at the world, and will stop trying new things and exercising his or her mind. And that child will never achieve his or her intellectual potential. And that's a real issue with infants. You know, infants who grow up abused and in an abusive environment where there's no nurturing, there's no bond, there's no love, there's nothing, just neglect and abuse. The infant just learns right away to not to not be curious, to not want to know about anything. They just basically shut down, and it's horrific. And older kids too will do the same thing. Another aspect of abuse which cannot be ignored is the physical stress it puts on a child. Multiple exposures to violence and trauma cause what's known as autonomic and endocrine hyperarousal, and basically it means the victim gets stressed out. And when a person experiences this hyperarousal over and over again, there are permanent physiological changes, and these changes can be seen as overreactions to stimuli, as in being easily startled, especially by things that remind the victim of the original event, generally being emotionally numb, or craving high-risk, stimulating, or dangerous experiences or self-injury, difficulties in attention and concentration, cardiovascular problems, and immune suppression, which leads to a higher risk for colds and more severe illnesses. And there's a long list of outcomes for children experiencing abuse. They range from mild, almost unnoticeable personality effects to full-blown breakdowns in healthy functioning. The point is that abuse increases a child's risk of developing a number of health and psychological problems. I know it's extremely harsh what child abuse does to children. I donated. I'm actually put it on my donor card. I'm donating my body to science, so they can take whatever usable parts are there. If there's anything usable to donate, and then anything that's just not, whatever. And also, it's kind of, it'd be interesting if people take a look and see, just the kind of damage done. You know what I mean? It's absolutely horrific, right? It really is. These poor kids out here, man, they do not deserve this. I know I remember being stressed out as a kid and being very much on hyper alert and always looking around, always conscious of who was in the room, always conscious of who was in the house, really. That's when the fights would go on, would be when my dad got home from work, or, if my parents were in the same room together, that was an issue. It was always kind of like, uh-oh. And, because they couldn't even be in the same room together, it was very, very harsh. And even when they went to the grocery stores, like they would fight in the grocery stores, and they would always take me because I was the youngest. So out of the 7 siblings, I had 6 siblings, I was number 7. So I was the baby in the family, right? So my parents would cart me off to the grocery store with them, and it was embarrassing, because they would batter each other in the grocery store and fight and scream and call each other names, And I'd just be hiding in the background, kind of like staying sort of a little bit away from them, you know what I mean? Because I didn't want people to associate me with them, you know what I mean? I was kind of considered my parents to be like my kidnappers. I used to pretend that actually when I was a kid, because my dad would be driving like 90 miles an hour down the road. My mom would be screaming, "You're going to kill us," and hitting him, and then he'd be hitting her, and they'd be pounding each other in the front seat. My dad's driving 90 with the gas pedal floored, and pretty soon it's 120, and my back seat laying down on the floor thinking, "Oh my God, this is my kidnappers. They've kidnapped me." This was the stuff that used to run through my mind, because my mind could not grasp that these two people were my parents. It was a harsh reality. It was like I chose to believe they were my kidnappers and that I didn't really belong to them. That's really sad, but that's the truth. And I never wanted them to go to my school stuff, like parent-teacher day, where the kids show off their cool little projects that they've been doing, and, the whatever they call those things where the parents go to the school and see all the neat stuff the kids are doing in the classroom and whatnot. And I really never wanted them to come to that, because, it was just always a possibility for a fight when they were together, see. So it was horrible. It was an absolutely horrible way to grow up. But it was just very stressful. We never slept well at night, our whole family, because the fights would generally break out at night. And so you go to school the next day and you're all exhausted. And then you're thinking, what if somebody gets killed while I'm at school? And that was always an issue, and I talked about that on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here tonight, just because of the domestic violence and abuse. Growing up with my parents treating each other so violently, I thought, someone's going to get killed, and I said I didn't want my mom to die, right? But I kind of thought for sure somebody, like I thought I'd get pulled out of school and told that my mom was killed by my dad. That was a thought that used to run through my head, and also, or a sibling, right? That one of my siblings had been killed by my dad. This sort of thing used to run through my mind all the way through high school. It was not something that I just thought of once and that was it. This was something that was in the back of my mind all the time, and that's because my parents had been, I grew up from day one, really, from day zero, or from day one. I was brought home day one. I was actually in an incubator for 2 months, so, I was really 2 months old when I came home. But, from a baby all the way through, I grew up in this hellhole of a domestic violence and abusive home, right? So, it was a bad way to grow up and incredibly damaging to my body. I had all kinds of problems, not only because of the abuse I was suffering, but also just the nervousness, just being nervous all the time. I had a lot of nervous tics. I talk a lot about this on my morning show, one child abuse survivor to another, because, I'm kind of going through and just mentioning a few things as they come up, right? And I remember I had quite a few nervous tics. They were pointed out to be, my young adult life. And some of them I'd stopped doing by the time I was a teenager, but some I actually was still doing, and it was pointed out to me that I was doing these things, and I really thought, I didn't even kind of realize that I was doing them because I was doing them for so long. People were like, well, why do you do that? And I was like, I don't know, and I thought about it. I thought, I'm just like a nervous person, right? And it's just from the abuse that I suffered and from watching and living in this violent home. And at any moment there could be some crazy stuff going on. So it is absolutely harsh on a person, on a child, right? So I know what that's like, and I know what it is to, because I suffered a lot of physical abuse, especially from my mother, that caused me a lot of problems with, the adrenaline rushing and just, panicking, can't breathe, because of the physical beatings that I took from my mother. So I totally know what that's all about. It's extremely hard on a child's body, absolutely incredibly hard, and it does lead to a lot of problems. It doesn't always mean that a child who's been abused will go on and self-injure and these types of things, or that they would be sick all their life. It just depends, and it also depends on the severity. It depends on whether that child ever had any support within the home. Like if there was somebody around, like a grandparent, or let's say one of the aunts happened to be normal, and they used to, talk to the child and try to help that child out. Then if there was some positive influence in there somewhere, then, it kind of does help the child to see, it's not my fault, and, you would hope that person would get that child some help. Quite often people won't. But, it just depends on a lot of things, right? Not every child who's been abused will go on to self-injure and all this stuff, or have these, real problems, but some do, and it's absolutely horrific, right? They said effects of child abuse include, and they talk about them here, academic difficulties, aggressive behavior, alcohol and other drug abuse, anxiety, attention problems, bad dreams, bedwetting, behavior problems, and this can include, it doesn't necessarily mean that all children who have been abused would go through all of this, right? But just that they could. Chronic pain, compulsive sexual behaviors, concentration problems, dangerous behaviors such as speeding, dehydration, depression, dissociative states, eating disorders, failure to thrive, fear or shyness, fear of certain adults or places, frequent injuries, insomnia, learning problems, right? So many more, they list them all here. Lying, malnutrition, oppositional behavior, panic attacks, physical symptoms such as headaches and stomach ache, repeated self-injury, risky sexual behaviors, running away, self-neglect, separation anxiety, sexual dysfunction, sleep disorders, social withdrawal, stealing, stuttering, substance abuse, suicide attempts, thumb-sucking, or any age-inappropriate behavior and truancy. So this is just the types of things that can happen to children. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of those things would happen to children. I have a guest here in the room here, in the chat room here with me, and it's great to have you here. Thanks very much for being here. I appreciate it. It's a little bit disturbing topic, but this is what I talk about, child abuse and the issues that surround it, and it is disturbing. And the reason I know is because I survived it, and it's very disturbing. And these poor kids out here, that I see people posting stuff because of what I do. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I do a whole lot of work on Facebook and all the social networking just to promote awareness. And I see people post things like, well, I can't bear to listen to this or watch these or see these pictures, or hear this stuff about child abuse because it breaks my heart. And then I always, kind of, I understand that. I totally do. But then I have to sit there and I think, well, yeah, but like I didn't want to be abused as a child, and I was forced to endure that. And so I don't mind talking about this stuff. I don't mind, trying to make a difference in this mess for these kids out here, right? Because I'm going to live through this. Whether I'm going to experience the aftermath, whether I talk about it or not. So it really doesn't matter to me. Is I'm going to have to deal with this stuff regardless. But there's these kids out here right now, who are being abused in every horrific way you could think of. And then there's people out there, well, I don't want to see it. It's kind of like, the people around the world who are suffering and dying, from malnutrition, like Africa and different countries around the world, that children are just dying, because there's no clean drinking water, there's no food, and malnutrition. And you just sit there and you think, if nobody wanted to look at the pictures, nobody wanted to know about it, well, then there'll be no help for those kids. You know what I mean? It is disturbing, and that's the whole issue. These poor kids are having to deal with this tonight. They're being raped, they're being beaten, burned, stabbed, choked, suffocated, thrown into walls, thrown into furniture. Their heads are being busted open. Literally, I cover the headlines on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio on Tuesdays and Friday nights, and you take a look at some of these headlines out here, and it's horrific what these little babies are going through. And a lot of these children suffer these head trauma, and whatnot between the ages of 0 and 4 years old, and it's generally fatal then, right? The older the child gets, the better the chance that they will survive the abuse, right? But the children between the ages of 0 or 1 day old and 4 years old are really at risk, for fatalities, because their little bodies cannot handle that, and neither can a 5-year-old, neither can a 6-year-old, neither can a 7-year-old. Believe you me, I'll tell you about it. I know what this is all about, so it's horrific. And I know for myself, effects of child abuse, I had academic difficulties, aggressive behavior was a problem I had, drug problems, I had I was a drug addict until the age of 21. Anxiety is probably still an issue with me, I'm sure of it. Attention problems, maybe. Bad dreams, I've always had a lot of nightmares associated with the abuse that I suffered until pretty much right around the time that I began my healing journey, which was about 4 years ago. I haven't had any more of the nightmares that I used to have about the abuse, which is great. Bedwetting, I don't think I did any of that. Behavior problems, definitely. Chronic pain, absolutely. Compulsive sexual behaviors, no. Concentration problems, yeah, I'd say maybe. I have a little bit of trouble concentrating, but it could be the drugs that I did too. Dangerous behavior such as speeding, always. Always looking for dangerous behavior. I didn't care if I lived or died, and I quite often driving extremely high and or driving half asleep, and just not paying attention to the road. I wrecked quite a few cars, and dehydration, depression. I don't know. I've never been diagnosed depressed, you know what I mean? But I'm sure that I've had bouts of depression, absolutely. But I've been able to pull myself out of it, thank God. But I know so many people who have not. My mother was manic depressive. She was, which is nowadays, I guess they kind of call it bipolar. My brother was also diagnosed manic depressive back in the old days when they were diagnosing it manic depressive. They never did get any help with it, which is unfortunate. My brother killed himself at the age of 33, suicide, and he had tried many times. Like some people thought it was just, something he was trying, or it was an accident or something. But he had tried many times, and he kept getting saved. Right? They finally made it. And another one of my brothers died in a shelter from a drug overdose at the age of 37. And my mom was manic depressive as well. And she was always talking about suicide and killing herself and killing me and killing everybody else. Absolutely horrific. Dissociative states, I don't have that problem, but I think there's people in my family that do. Eating, there's only a couple of us left now, right? Eating disorders, failure to that's a huge issue for infants and babies, right? Fear or shyness, I had a lot of that, a lot of fear and shyness when I was little. Really little, and then I became aggressive. Right? Fear of certain adults or places, absolutely. Frequent injuries, yeah. Insomnia, definitely. Learning problems, yeah. So, I could go through this list and pretty much everything on there is it except for, this promiscuity stuff. I didn't have a problem with that. I was actually completely shut down sexually because of the sexual abuse that I suffered as a child, right? Absolutely horrific, right? So make sure, you look out for the kids in your own life. Make sure that they're not being abused. You get the information, learn the signs and symptoms and how to report it, that you should report it. People always say, I don't want to break up a happy home. Well, a child is being abused is not happy, let me tell you that. if you're wrong, they won't remove the child, and half the time when you're right, they won't remove the child. We were left in the home. They don't remove the child unless they feel there's an imminent threat to their life, which is really sad because these children stay in the home and they end up being killed, right? We see this lots. Very, very sad. But I would say if everybody would just stop abusing their children, we could stop child abuse, right? So that's what I want to promote, right? So have a great night, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, one child abuse survivor to another. And then tomorrow night again, actually tomorrow night I won't be on this show, but I'll be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio covering the headlines. And then I won't be back on again until Thursday, but I'll let everybody know about that because I'm kind of changing my stuff. So I'm going to change my show page around, and so everybody will know when the shows are coming on. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I appreciate it. Have a great night. Take really good care of yourselves. If you're in an abusive situation, you make sure that you get yourself some help. You make a phone call. You call a crisis line. You call a hotline. If you're a young person listening to this and you're being abused, you do the right thing. You get yourself some help. You make a phone call. You call one of the child abuse hotlines. If you know somebody who's being abused, or you know a child's being abused, you do the right thing and you make a phone call and you get that person some help, right? So take care, everybody. Have a great night. Talk to you real soon.